The oak-paneled conference room of the Reich Air Ministry fell into an expectant hush on that fateful October 4, 1943. Through the tall windows, smoke curled skyward from Berlin's desperately working factories, their machinery grinding out replacements for the mounting Luftwaffe losses. Reich Marshal Hermann Göring stood before an assembly of German aircraft manufacturers, his corpulent frame casting a shadow across maps of a Europe still largely under Nazi control. His words, carefully recorded by stenographers, would become one of history's most catastrophic miscalculations. The Americans cannot build airplanes. They are very good at refrigerators and razor blades. Even as these dismissive words left his lips, American shipyards were launching 3 Liberty ships per day. The Richmond shipyards alone would complete another vessel before his meeting concluded. Within 6 months, those Americans who supposedly couldn't build airplanes would be sending 1,000 bomber raids over Germany while their shipyards launched a new cargo ship every 8 hours. The mathematics of German defeat were being written not in battle plans, but in production statistics that would soon reveal the fatal delusion at the heart of Nazi strategy. Göring's dismissal of American industrial capacity wasn't born in 1943, but had deep roots stretching back to German military thinking of an earlier era. As a World War I flying ace who had shot down 22 Allied aircraft, he had witnessed America's late and limited contribution to that earlier conflict. The United States had entered the Great War with virtually no air force, forced to fly French and British planes. This memory shaped his fatal assumption about American capabilities, creating a blind spot that would prove catastrophic for the Third Reich. The specific quote about airplanes became Göring's standard response whenever questioned about American threat potential. Throughout the early war years, he repeated variations of this assessment with unwavering confidence. In 1940, after France fell to German might, he assured Hitler with characteristic bombast, "The Americans are good about making fancy cars and refrigerators, but that doesn't mean they are any good at making aircraft. They are bluffing. They are excellent at bluffing." This wasn't merely Göring's personal delusion, but reflected a systematic failure of German intelligence to comprehend American potential. In November 1941, Oberst Joseph Beppo Schmid, chief of Luftwaffe intelligence, submitted a report stating that American aircraft production could not exceed 400 planes per month. His analysis concluded that American factories lacked the precision, tooling, and skilled workers necessary for military production. German naval intelligence proved equally dismissive. In January 1942, Captain Zersi reported to Admiral Redder that American shipbuilding capacity was limited to perhaps 1 cargo vessel per week per shipyard. "Their workers are soft," he wrote with Prussian contempt, accustomed to high wages and short hours. "They lack the discipline of German craftsmen." Even Hitler, while publicly dismissive of American capabilities, privately understood the looming danger. As he confided to his generals in December 1941, "We must defeat Russia quickly. Once that is done, we can deal with America before their production becomes overwhelming." But Göring, responsible for assessing enemy air power, remained convinced of American industrial weakness, his prejudices blinding him to the gathering storm across the Atlantic. Even as Göring repeated his dismissive assessments, America was transforming into what Franklin Roosevelt called the arsenal of democracy. On January 6, 1942, in his State of the Union address, Roosevelt announced production goals that would have seemed fantastical just months earlier. First, to increase our production rate of airplanes so rapidly that in this year, 1942, we shall produce 60,000 planes. The rate of increase will be maintained and continued so that next year, 1943, we shall produce 125,000 airplanes, including 100,000 combat planes. German intelligence intercepted these numbers with characteristic skepticism. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels wrote in his diary on January 8, 1942, "The Führer laughed when I showed him Roosevelt's production targets." Pure propaganda. If they could build 1/10 of these numbers, it would be a miracle. What the Germans failed to understand was that America had been preparing since 1940, laying foundations not with military orders but with British gold and desperate necessity. The British Purchasing Commission, facing catastrophic shipping losses to U-boat attacks, had approached American industrialist Henry J. Kaiser with an audacious proposal: build 60 cargo ships using mass production techniques never before applied to shipbuilding. Kaiser, who had never built a ship but had constructed the Hoover Dam ahead of schedule, accepted the challenge with characteristic American optimism. His revolutionary approach would transform not just shipbuilding but the entire concept of wartime production. Instead of skilled shipwrights crafting each vessel individually, Kaiser introduced prefabrication, welding instead of riveting, and assembly line techniques borrowed from automobile manufacturing. The Liberty ship design was deliberately simple: a 441-foot cargo vessel based on an old British pattern, powered by a triple-expansion steam engine that any mechanic could maintain. When German intelligence obtained technical specifications from a torpedoed Liberty ship in early 1942, they dismissed it as primitive. Corvette Capitan Peter Kramer wrote dismissively, "These ships are coffins, slow, ungainly, with the sailing characteristics of a brick." What Kramer failed to grasp was that the Liberty ship's simplicity was its genius. Every part was standardized, every section prefabricated in factories across America, and shipped to 18 shipyards where they were assembled like giant three-dimensional puzzles. The learning curve was steep but swift. Workers who had never seen a ship were outproducing veteran German shipwrights within months. The first Liberty ship, the SS Patrick Henry, was launched on September 27, 1941, after 244 days of construction. German naval intelligence noted this with satisfaction. At that rate, Americans could build perhaps 50 ships per year. What they failed to notice was the acceleration. The second ship took 180 days. The 10th took 105 days. By January 1942, construction time had dropped to 70 days. Then Henry Kaiser made an announcement that German intelligence dismissed as pure propaganda. He would build a ship in 10 days. September 1942 brought the impossible to life at Oregon Ship Building Corporation in Portland. As German U-boats enjoyed their second happy time, sinking 69,000 tons of Allied shipping that month, Kaiser's workers laid the keel of the SS Joseph N. Keel at 12:01 a.m. on September 13. What followed was a precisely choreographed industrial ballet. 3 shifts of workers labored around the clock while prefabricated sections, some weighing 250 tons, were lifted into place by massive cranes. Welders, many of them women who had never held a torch 6 months earlier, laid down miles of perfect beads. The workforce included housewives, farmers, and store clerks who had been transformed into shipbuilders in weeks. Among them was Wendy the welder, whose real name was Janet Doyle, a former waitress who became one of the fastest welders in the yard. Working alongside her was Tom Washington, an African-American sharecropper from Alabama who had become a master ship fitter, and Miguel Santos, a Mexican-American whose welding speed exceeded German standards. On September 23 at 4:30 p.m., the SS Joseph N. Keel slid into the Columbia River exactly 10 days after her keel was laid. In Berlin, German intelligence dismissed the reports with characteristic arrogance. Admiral Dönitz told his staff, "Even if true, this is a stunt. They cannot maintain such production." But Kaiser wasn't finished. He announced with American audacity, "We can do it faster." November 8, 1942, at 12:01 a.m. at Richmond Shipyard No. 2 in California, as German forces retreated from El Alamein, American shipyard workers began an achievement that would demolish the last vestiges of German confidence. The keel of the SS Robert E. Perry was laid as hundreds of prefabricated sections weighted in precise order around the shipway. The entire ship had been built before it was built, every piece constructed, fitted, and tested in workshops around the yard. Now they would assemble it like a massive speed build demonstration. Kaiser had handpicked his best workers for this supreme effort. The team included Catherine Glaskick, a former school teacher who had become one of the fastest welders in the yard, laying beads at 35 feet per hour, a rate German welders rarely achieve. Richmond Jones, an African-American former sharecropper, operated the main crane with precision that allowed placement of 250-ton sections within an inch of their marks. Mary Piloseno, a 19-year-old Italian-American, supervised the electrical installation team that would wire 5 miles of cable in under 20 hours. Hour by hour, the ship took shape at impossible speed. The bottom hull plates were welded in place within 6 hours. The side shells were up within 18 hours. By the end of the first day, observers could recognize the outline of a ship. The prefabricated deckhouse, complete with plumbing and wiring already installed, was lowered into place on day 2, a single lift that would have taken German shipyards a week to accomplish. The engine, a 2,500 horsepower triple expansion steam monster weighing 140 tons, was lowered into place on day 3. It had been assembled in Toledo, tested, partially disassembled for shipping, and arrived with engineers who could install it in hours instead of weeks. On November 12th at 3:30 p.m., the SS Robert E. Peary was launched 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes after her keel was laid. She displaced 14,245 tons and would need only minimal fitting out before entering service. The impossible had become routine. The first credible reports reached Berlin in December 1942. Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights using long-range Focke-Wulf FW-200 Condors brought back photographs that German intelligence initially refused to believe. The images showed dozens of Liberty ships under construction at single shipyards. Major Hermann Wilhelms counted over 200 ships under construction in aerial photographs. His report, submitted December 15, 1942, warned, "If these observations are accurate, American shipbuilding capacity exceeds our estimates by a factor of 10. The report was suppressed. Göring refused to accept that his assessment had been wrong. "The photographs are deceptive," he told his staff with characteristic stubbornness. "The Americans are showing us the same ships from different angles to create an illusion of mass production." But U-boat commanders were reporting disturbing changes. Captain Lieutenant Klaus Baum of U-521 noted in January 1943, "Convoy HX-222 contained 47 merchant vessels, all appearing newly constructed. Standard types obviously mass-produced. Where are these ships coming from?" The answer was everywhere. 18 American shipyards were now building Liberty ships with industrial precision that defied German comprehension. The Bethlehem Fairfield shipyard in Baltimore employed 47,000 workers and was launching a ship every 4 days. The California Shipbuilding Corporation was completing one every 5 days. Workers who had never seen the ocean were building ships faster than experienced German craftsmen could imagine possible. By March 1943, American shipyards were completing Liberty ships at a rate that defied German comprehension, 3 ships launched daily. Admiral Dönitz staff calculated that U-boats would need to sink 1.3 million tons monthly just to break even. The best month for U-boats was November 1942 when they sank 729,000 tons. They were already losing the war of production, though they didn't yet realize it. Each Liberty ship required 250,000 different parts in a testament to American industrial complexity. The hull alone needed 30,000 separate pieces of steel cut to precise specifications. The electrical system used 25 miles of wiring. The ship contained 3,500 feet of piping, 2,500 valves, and 350 miles of welding. Yet American workers were assembling these complex machines in an average of 42 days by mid-1943, a feat that German engineers would have declared impossible. The workforce itself contradicted Nazi racial theories with devastating effectiveness. Of the 650,000 Americans building ships, 200,000 were women, the famous Rosie the Riveters, who proved that gender had nothing to do with industrial capability. African Americans, whom Nazi ideology dismissed as inferior, were operating cranes and laying welds that exceeded German standards. At Kaiser's Richmond yards alone, integrated work crews, impossible under Nazi racial laws, were producing a ship every 51 hours by May 1943. The diversity was staggering in its contradiction of Nazi ideology. Chinese-American welders worked alongside Norwegian immigrants. Native American riveters from New Mexico collaborated with Jewish refugees from Germany. Mexican-American women supervised crews that included poor whites from Appalachia. This coalition of the supposedly inferior was outproducing the German master race by factors that defied Nazi calculations and beliefs. May 1943 brought devastating news to the Wolf's lair in East Prussia. Admiral Dönitz stood before Hitler with reports of what became known as Black May. The U-boat force had lost 41 submarines while sinking only 50 merchant ships. American shipyards were building ships 3 times faster than U-boats could sink them. Mein Führer, Dönitz reported with Prussian directness. The Americans launched 140 merchant vessels last month. We sank 41. At this rate, they will have replaced every ship lost since 1939 by year's end. Hitler turned to Göring, whose corpulent frame seemed to shrink under the Führer's gaze. You assured me the Americans could only build consumer goods, Hitler said quietly, his voice containing the menace that preceded his violent rages. Göring attempted to deflect responsibility. The ships are of inferior quality, Mein Führer. They will break apart in storms. Hitler's response cut through the deflection. Our intelligence, your intelligence, is worthless. The Americans are outproducing us in every category. The numbers were undeniable and devastating. American factories were producing 8,000 aircraft per month, while German production, despite Albert Speer's heroic efforts, reached only 2,000. American tank production exceeded 2,000 monthly, while Germany managed 500. The Liberty ships were just the visible symbol of an industrial supremacy Germany could never hope to match. On October 4, 1943, Göring gave the speech quoted at this narrative's opening, still clinging to denial even as evidence mounted around him like an avalanche. He told aircraft manufacturers with desperate conviction, the Americans claim fantastic production figures. They say 8,000 aircraft per month. This is naturally impossible. Even if true, the quality must be inferior. Quantity without quality is meaningless. But even as he spoke these words, Göring knew the truth in his heart. Luftwaffe pilots were reporting that American P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts were superior to German fighters in every measure that mattered. B-17s and B-24s were appearing over Germany in 1,000-plane formations, their inferior American construction systematically destroying German cities with methodical precision. General Dorfflieger Adolf Galland confronted Göring after the speech with brutal honesty. Herr Reich Marshal, I have seen captured American production figures. They are building 54 long-engine bombers weekly. That's more bombers than we have fighters in total. Your dismissal of their capabilities has doomed the Reich. Göring retreated to Carenhall, his hunting estate, where he consoled himself with masterpieces looted from European museums, unable to face the reality of his catastrophic miscalculation. The most credible witnesses to American industrial might were U-boat crews facing it directly in the cruel mathematics of the Atlantic War. Captain Lieutenant Heinz Schaefer of U-977 wrote with the clarity of desperation. By late 1943, the convoys were enormous, 80, 90, sometimes 100 ships, most of them new American construction. We would sink 1 or 2 if we were lucky, but it was like trying to bail out the ocean with a teaspoon. For every ship we sank, 3 new ones appeared on the horizon. Oberleutnant Sir C. Herbert Wolfarth, commander of U-415, provided perhaps the most eloquent testimony to American industrial supremacy. We could see the Liberty ships through our periscopes, painted in fresh gray, their hulls bearing the marks of mass production, welded seams instead of rivets, standardized deck equipment, identical profiles. They came in endless processions, each convoy larger than the last. We began to understand that we were fighting not just ships, but an entire industrial system that could replace losses faster than we could create them. The psychological impact proved as devastating as the physical reality. American broadcasts announced ship launchings like sports scores, while German submarine crews stopped counting because the numbers were driving them to despair. By January 1944, American production statistics were being broadcast as psychological warfare, and German intelligence could only listen helplessly as the numbers were announced with American matter-of-factness. The statistics told a story of industrial dominance that made German resistance seem almost pathetic. Ships completed in 1943 included 1,238 Liberty ships, 203 Victory ships improved versions, 122 tankers, and 367 military vessels. Monthly production peaks reached staggering heights. December 1943 saw 155 merchant ships launched, 8,789 aircraft delivered, 2,464 tanks completed, and 153,000 military trucks manufactured. Wilhelm Zangen, head of the Reich Association of German Industry, reported to Hitler in February 1944 with numbers that painted a picture of inevitable defeat. The Americans are producing annually 100,000 aircraft to our 25,000, 50,000 tanks to our 19,000, 2.5 million military vehicles to our 100,000, and 2,500 merchant ships to our 200. These ratios are not sustainable for even another year. Hitler allegedly threw the report into the fireplace, shouting, "defeatist propaganda." But the numbers were actually conservative. American production in 1944 would exceed even these estimates. Independent confirmation came from Germany's Japanese allies, who had no illusions about American industrial capacity. Commander Toshikazu Ome, assistant naval attaché in Berlin, sent a coded message to Tokyo in March 1944. German leadership continues to underestimate American production capacity. Have verified Americans launched 173 ships in February alone. German officials refuse to believe. Their delusion endangers strategic planning. Recommend Imperial Navy assume American production is double German estimates. The Japanese, facing American might in the Pacific, harbored no delusions about American capabilities. Admiral Yamamoto had warned before Pearl Harbor, "I can run wild for 6 months. After that, I have no expectation of success." He understood what Göring never grasped, that American industrial capacity, once mobilized, was essentially infinite from the perspective of any enemy. June 6, 1944, D-Day, provided the ultimate demonstration of American industrial capacity made manifest in the greatest seaborne invasion in history. German defenders witnessed an armada that defied comprehension. 6,939 vessels, including hundreds of Liberty ships loaded with supplies, vehicles, and ammunition. General Lieutenant Wilhelm Richter, commanding the 716th Infantry Division, reported with awe and terror, "The sea is black with ships. They stretch to the horizon in every direction. This is not an invasion, it is a migration." Every Liberty ship in that vast fleet represented 42 days of American industrial effort. Every tank coming ashore was one of 88,410 America would produce during the war. Every Jeep was one of 639,245 that would roll off assembly lines with mechanical precision. The landing craft themselves, thousands of them, had been built in places like Evansville, Indiana, and Quincy, Illinois, by workers who had never seen the ocean but understood the urgency of their task. Obergefreiter Ernst Goff, defending Sword Beach, later wrote with the wonder of a man witnessing the impossible, "We had been told Americans were soft, that their soldiers would break under pressure, that their equipment was inferior. But I watched their engineers build a floating harbor in 5 days that was larger than most German ports. Their trucks climbed our beach obstacles like mountain goats. Their supposedly inferior fighters swept the Luftwaffe from the skies." Even as American bombs fell on Berlin in February 1945, Göring maintained his fantasy with the desperation of a man who could not face reality. He told his staff with characteristic delusion, "The American production figures are inflated. Many ships are probably wooden mock-ups for propaganda purposes." His deputy, General Dorflieger Karl Koller, recorded with exasperation, "The Reich Marshal lives in fantasy. Yesterday, 1,000 American bombers destroyed Linz. He still insists they cannot have built so many aircraft. When I showed him crashed bomber serial numbers proving at least 15,000 B-17s and B-24s have been built, he accused me of defeatism. The truth was even worse than Koller knew. America had produced 31,040 long-engine bombers by war's end, 18,482 B-24 Liberators, and 12,731 B-17 Flying Fortresses. This single category of aircraft exceeded Germany's entire aircraft production for the entire war, a fact that would have shattered what remained of Göring's delusions if he had been capable of accepting it. When Americans captured the Reich Air Ministry in May 1945, they found Göring's intelligence files filled with reports that painted an accurate picture of American industrial might, all stamped unreliable or enemy propaganda in Göring's own hand. One report from June 1943 stated, "American shipyard in Panama, visible from neutral waters, counted 17 Liberty ships under construction simultaneously. Estimated completion rate 1 every 3 days. Göring had written, impossible. Agent compromised or insane. Another report from December 1943 announced completion of the 1,000th Liberty ship. Göring's notation read simply propaganda. Actual number probably less than 200. Major William Hutchinson, reviewing the documents after the war, wrote with amazement, "It was staggering to see how completely the German leadership had deluded themselves. They had accurate intelligence, but refused to believe it because it contradicted their racial theories and pre-war assumptions." At Nuremberg in 1946, Göring was confronted with the final production statistics that told the story of his catastrophic miscalculation. 2,710 Liberty ships, 531 Victory ships, 296,429 aircraft, 88,410 tanks, and 2,383,311 military trucks. Göring responded with the stubborn pride that had cost his nation the war. These figures represent quantity, not quality. We Germans emphasized quality over quantity. Prosecutor Robert Jackson then showed a captured German report from 1944 written by Göring's own staff, admitting that American aircraft were superior in every category: speed, range, armament, and reliability. Confronted with his own expert's admission, Göring fell silent, his final defense crumbling under the weight of documented evidence. In conversations with psychiatrist Dr. Gustav Gilbert, Göring finally admitted the magnitude of his error. "I underestimated the Americans. I thought they were soft, spoiled by luxury. When I said they could only make consumer goods, I believed it. It was the greatest miscalculation of my life. They buried us under an avalanche of production. The German dismissal of American capacity had consequences written in blood and steel." Admiral Dönitz continued the U-boat campaign long after it became mathematically impossible to win. Of 40,000 men who served in U-boats, 28,000 died, a 70% casualty rate, the highest of any service in any nation during the war. These men died trying to sink ships that were being replaced faster than they could be destroyed, victims of their leadership's delusions about American industrial weakness. The Luftwaffe, believing Göring's assurances about limited American aircraft production, continued offensive operations long after they should have shifted to pure defense. The result was 433,000 Luftwaffe personnel killed trying to fight an enemy producing 50 aircraft for every German plane, a mathematical impossibility that German pilots paid for with their lives. The U-boat statistics themselves tell the story with brutal clarity. Germany built 1,162 U-boats during the war and sank almost 3,000 Allied ships, 175 warships, and 2,825 merchant vessels. But the Allies built 5,777 merchant vessels during the same period. For every ship sunk, 2 were built to replace it. Mathematics doesn't lie, even when Reich Marshals do. Behind the Liberty ships stood 18 million Americans engaged in war production, more workers than Germany's entire armed forces. The Richmond shipyards alone employed 93,000 workers at peak production, more than Germany's entire shipbuilding industry. These workers came from everywhere, shattering Nazi theories about racial and social hierarchy with their diverse excellence. Emma Martinez, a Mexican-American welder at Todd Houston Shipbuilding, completed 300 feet of perfect welding per shift, a rate German welders rarely matched. Dorothy Luck, a housewife from Oakland, became a crane operator handling 250-ton lifts with precision that would have impressed German engineers. Thomas Washington, an African-American sharecropper from Alabama, became a ship fitter whose precision exceeded German standards. They worked in conditions impossible under Nazism: integrated cafeterias despite local segregation laws, child care centers for working mothers, and medical clinics providing free health care. Workers earned $1.20 per hour, more than German skilled workers earned daily, and bought war bonds with their surplus income, while German workers faced execution for slowdowns. The contrast was stark and ideologically devastating. American workers voluntarily worked overtime for extra pay and pride, while German factories relied increasingly on slave labor from conquered territories. workers who actively sabotaged production when possible. While American workers' children attended school, German teenagers were drafted into anti-aircraft crews. While American workers suggested improvements that sped production, German workers who pointed out problems risked being shot for defeatism. Liberty ships showcased American innovation that Germany couldn't match or even comprehend. Welding replaced riveting, reducing construction time by 30% and weight by 600 tons. The technique, developed by Lincoln Electric Company, was so advanced that captured German engineers declared it impossible without seeing demonstrations. Prefabrication reached levels Germany never achieved. Entire deck houses were built miles from shipyards, complete with plumbing, electrical systems, and furniture, then transported by specially designed rail cars and lifted by cranes that could handle 250 tons, 5 times the capacity of Germany's largest shipyard cranes. The production system itself was revolutionary in its simplicity and effectiveness. Henry Kaiser introduced assembly line techniques where workers specialized in specific tasks. A welder might work on the same type of joint for months, achieving speed and perfection impossible with traditional methods. The learning curve was so steep that workers who had never seen a ship in July were outproducing veteran German shipwrights by December. Each Liberty ship required materials from across America, delivered with precision German logistics officers declared impossible. Steel plate from Pittsburgh arrived exactly when needed. Engines from Toledo were delivered complete and tested. Electrical generators from Schenectady appeared precisely on schedule. The railroad system supporting this miracle moved staggering quantities. The Pennsylvania Railroad alone transported 50 million tons of war materials in 1943, more than Germany's entire rail system could handle despite using slave labor. American railroads achieved this while maintaining civilian passenger service, a feat German logistics officers studied with professional admiration and personal despair. Major Hans Carroll, a German logistics officer who studied American production after the war, wrote with the grudging respect of a professional for superior organization, "We struggled to supply single factories. The Americans supplied entire industries. We counted boxcars. They counted train loads. We planned in weeks. They planned in years." Even as Liberty ships poured from American shipyards, Americans were improving the design with characteristic innovation. Victory ships, introduced in 1944, were faster 15 to 17 knots versus 11, larger and more sophisticated, yet built almost as quickly, 42 days average. The Victory ship program demonstrated American ability to innovate while maintaining mass production, incorporating new turbine engines, improved hull designs, better ventilation for cargo preservation, and enhanced navigation equipment for improved safety, all without slowing production. By contrast, German attempts to improve submarines through the Type XXI program produced only chaos. Just 4 Type XXI U-boats were operational before war's end, while America built 531 Victory ships in 18 months. The economic disparity made Göring's dismissal delusional from the start. 1941 American GDP was $126 billion versus Germany's $35 billion. American steel production reached 80 million tons versus Germany's 20 million tons. America produced 26 billion kilowatt-hours of electricity versus Germany's 8 billion. American production increased 170% during the war, while German production increased only 30% despite Speer's desperate efforts. By 1944, America spent $90 billion annually on war, more than Germany's entire pre-war GDP. The Liberty ship program alone cost $4.6 billion, exceeding Germany's entire U-boat fleet expenditure. Dr. Rolf Wagenfor, head of German wartime statistics, calculated after the war with German precision, America outproduced Germany 6, 1 in raw materials 8, 1 in finished goods 12, 1 in transportation capacity. We were not defeated. We were buried. American production became a weapon itself, with the Office of War Information broadcasting statistics to Germany. German soldiers heard that America was building a ship every 8 hours, a plane every 5 minutes, and a tank every 7 minutes. They didn't believe it until they faced it on the battlefield. Gefreiter Helmut Romer, defending Normandy, wrote with the clarity of a man witnessing the impossible. The Americans announced 10,000 planes for Invasion Day. We laughed. Then the sky turned black with aircraft. Everything they told us was propaganda turned out to be true. Everything our leaders told us was true turned out to be propaganda. Each Liberty ship became a symbol of American invincibility that German propaganda tried desperately to counter. They mocked them as ugly ducklings, but crews knew better. As one captured submariner told his interrogators, when convoys of 50, 60, 70 of these ships appeared, we knew the war was lost. Mathematics doesn't lie, even when politicians do. After Germany's surrender, American investigators surveyed German industrial leaders about their wartime assessments. Their responses uniformly condemned Göring's judgment with the bitter clarity of hindsight. Fritz Thyssen, the steel magnate who had helped Hitler rise to power, stated bluntly, Göring lived in fantasy. He visited America in the 1920s, saw only speakeasies and jazz clubs, never steel mills or auto plants. His ignorance cost Germany the war. Albert Speer was more damning in his assessment. Göring's dismissal of American production was criminal negligence. By the time I became armaments minister, it was too late. The Americans produced monthly what took us a year. Even Alfred Krupp, whose factories had been the pride of German industry, admitted the futility of their position. We produced the best steel in the world, but in artisan quantities. The Americans produced good steel in oceanic quantities. One Liberty ship contained enough steel for 50 Tiger tanks. They built 2,710 Liberty ships. We built 1,347 Tiger tanks. The arithmetic is inescapable. Even the Soviet Union, America's ally but ideological rival, was stunned by American industrial output. The Liberty ships became the lifeline not just for Britain but for the Soviet war effort as well. Marshal Georgy Zhukov wrote in his memoirs, the Americans gave us 400,000 trucks, 13,000 tanks, 15,000 aircraft, and 17 million tons of supplies. But what truly amazed us were the Liberty ships themselves, delivering these supplies through Arctic waters under constant German attack. Each ship that reached Murmansk represented a victory of American industry over German submarines. Without these ships, we could not have driven to Berlin. Nikita Khrushchev, who supervised Ukrainian industrial production during the war, was characteristically blunt. Without American trucks, we couldn't have moved our artillery. Without American steel, we couldn't have built our tanks. Without American food, we couldn't have fed our army. The Liberty ships brought us everything from boots to telephone wire to spam. Göring's dismissal of American industry was a gift to us. It meant Germany underestimated the force that was supplying both fronts against them. Soviet Admiral Nikolai Kharlamov added perspective from the naval war. We lost many ships to German U-boats in the Arctic convoys. But for every ship sunk, the Americans built 3 more. The Germans could sink ships. The Americans could build oceans of them. The ultimate numbers reveal Göring's catastrophic miscalculation in stark mathematical terms. Liberty ships, 2,710 built by 18 shipyards with an average construction time of 42 days by 1943. The fastest construction time was 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. Total tonnage reached 29,292,000 tons at a cost of $1.8 million per ship average. Total merchant ships of all types numbered 5,777 vessels, representing 56 million deadweight tons, more than all other nations combined. The shipyard workforce peaked at 1.7 million workers, including 600,000 women, 35%, and 250,000 African Americans, 14%, earning an average wage of $1.20 per hour. Comparative production statistics between the USA and Germany tell the story of industrial dominance. Aircraft 296,429 versus 111,767. Tanks 88,410 versus 67,429. Trucks 2,383,311 versus 350,000. Artillery 257,390 versus 159,147. Machine guns 2,679,840 versus 1,100,000. Ammunition 41 billion rounds versus 8 billion rounds. U-boat war statistics provide the final crushing verdict. Germany built 1,162 U-boats and destroyed 785 of them in combat. Allied ships sunk by U-boats numbered almost 3,000, but Allied ships built totaled 5,777, creating a net gain of almost 3,000 ships. The mathematics of victory and defeat could not be clearer. The Liberty ships transformed more than warfare. They transformed society itself. The shipyard integration, though limited by local laws, provided a model for post-war civil rights advances. Women proved their industrial capability permanently, changing the American workforce forever. Kaiser's healthcare system for workers became Kaiser Permanente, now serving 12 million Americans. Production techniques pioneered in the Liberty Ship program revolutionized global shipbuilding, with welding replacing riveting worldwide and prefabrication becoming standard. The assembly line concept influenced post-war Japanese and Korean shipbuilders who would eventually surpass American production using techniques Americans invented. Most importantly, Liberty ships proved that democracy could mobilize more effectively than totalists.